Hello, everyone. Today we are very happy to have Miss Chandra Easton with us. She is an astrologer from Australia, and she specializes in a variety of fields, including but not limited to medical astrology, soul readings with contact with angelic guides. She has founded two institutes, including the Delford College of Astrology and Esoteric Sciences, and Heartscape Australia. Thank you very much, Chandra, for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's very nice to meet you.
Well, to start, since the field of medical astrology is not something we hear about often, would you like to tell us a little bit about it and what is it that you do exactly?
Ah, yes. Well, medical astrology uses the natal chart, the same as the chart, but all the signs of the zodiacs and the planets have physical connections to the organs. You know, most people would know that the ascendant's got something to do with the health, as well as the sixth house, as well as the 12th house. So that's kind of the introductory level to medical astrology, where you look at the constitution, how strong the sun is, how strong the ascendant is, what's the ruler like. You look at the sixth house in terms of health maintenance, things that you need to do yourself. You look at the 12th house in terms of the chronic conditions or the karmic conditions. But way beyond that, you look to the general vitality or areas where there might be problems. So this might be a square or an opposition. It might be a square to the ascendant, or it could be an opposition between the sixth house and the 12th house. And then you look to the planets, particularly in terms of the, we know that some of the planets are beneficial and some are more harmful. So if you've got, for instance, a Mars, Saturn, Pluto conjunction in the 12th house in Leo, you might have long-standing issues with the heart, for instance. And then, of course, we use transits to see the timing, the transits and the progressions, to see the timing. And that's not to say that everything's written in stone and you can't do anything about it. You can use your natal chart, particularly the sixth house, to see what kind of therapy works for you. So, for instance, if you've got Virgo in the sixth house, you might discover that you're very sensitive to wheat products and that you'd be better off on a celiac diet. If you've got Cancer rising with squares to that Cancer rising, you might work it out that too much dairy is not good for you. You know, so there's some ordinary, easy levels of understanding medical astrology, and then deeper levels. Traditionally, the old medical astrology would say things like, well, don't have an operation under certain malefic signs, but certainly in Australia, for instance, if you can get into a hospital at all and you have something that needs attending, you can't tell them, well, I don't want it on this date or that date. So some of the old rules of kind of don't fit with the modern world. But, you know, there are so many things that impact people's health, whether it's emotional or psychological or dietary or hereditary or environmental. So all of those factors interplay. Yeah, it's a fascinating area. I'm not trained as a naturopath, but I've had an interest in I remember being in my early 20s and considering studying naturopathy or homeopathy, and did about 6 months worth of that and went, no, that's too big a science. So what I do is look at the indications in the chart and then refer people to a naturopath or to a GP, and say, this is what I think, please ask the medical specialist what they believe, because I'm not medically trained, you know. But sometimes you can look at the chart and go, this would be a very good idea to have surgery here, or no, you can deal with that with dietary things. And often as not, we can look to the underpinnings of the emotional matters. So someone who has, let's say, the moon in Pisces conjunct Neptune in the sixth house, would probably say to them something like, well, you know, it might be good to be a vegetarian and be very careful not to take too many drugs because you could get addicted. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's a fascinating subject, and it really interpenetrates with traditional astrology, psychological astrology, but certain people really have more need for an understanding of health matters. And then I have two professional hats. One is an esoteric astrologer, and the other is that I work as an ascension healer. And I've worked as a healer for 35 years and as an astrologer for 47 years, something like that. And I do tend to mix them. And so because I'm trained to work with light and I'm clairvoyant, then I often I attract clients who have medical problems that they can't get answers to in the normal course of, they've tried all sorts of things and they can't get answers. And so I work with a combination of the spiritual healing, the esoteric healing, and I speak to the medical guides because I can hear them. And they're the ones that know much more than I do about the body. So I will often get insight for a client that they haven't been able to get anywhere else. So the combination of the ascension healing that I do with medical astrology is a wonderful combination. And I've worked as a medical astrologer. I've been interested for a long time, but I'd say it's probably the last 10 years that I've really focused upon it, and probably the last 4 or 5 years that I've started to merge my healing work with the medical astrology. So sometimes someone will come along for a traditional astrology reading. Maybe they've got a health problem, or maybe they're trying to conceive a child. And then they may come back and have a medical intuitive session, that's what I call it, where I meditate and do some guided relaxation. I pray, and then I make the connection with the person's angels and with the medical guides and bring through information. And generally speaking, if I've already spoken to the person about their chart, well, I can, the two verify each other. And this is what we often find with the esoteric sciences, that, you can see indications in the chart and somebody else will get the same information from the palmistry. So I find that the information that the medical guides gives, it fits perfectly with the chart. Whether I look before or afterwards, it doesn't seem to make any difference.
Well,
yeah.
So it's safe to say that during a consultation, more often than not, you do get these messages from the medical guides, even if that is not something that your client was looking for initially.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think anybody who's worked with astrology for a long time will begin to work intuitively and heart-based. Yeah. So I will get flashes of intuition if I'm doing the person's chart. And because it's such a vast field, medical astrology, and because I'm not trained in that field, I find that I often spend a lot of time after the client's gone away researching and educating myself about the field, because, I've been working, for about 10 years with the medical astrology and only about 5 blending in with the healing. So I feel like there's so much more to learn. But it's so vital. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. Yeah.
Of course. Health is wealth, as everybody agrees.
That's right.
Changing the subject a little bit, browsing through your work, I saw that you have a section dedicated to divine feminine energy, and specifically the divine mothers of the earth.
That's right.
Something that I found very interesting was that you included Mary Magdalene as one of the divine mothers, and I have never encountered that before. How come?
How
What's her
come?
energy like?
Well, in the West, we're often told, well, there's only one Holy Mother and her name's Mary. But, civilization existed for thousands of years before the Christian era, and it's been sort of buried or appropriated. And the goddess energy, the feminine energy, has been taken a back seat for I think probably you'd say the last 2,000 years through the age of Pisces, while the masculine men have held the religious and the spiritual roles. And we've moved into the age of Aquarius, which is, you could say it's the age of the heart, you could say it's the age of the mothers. And so the men in the significant worldly positions, whether it's political, educational, spiritual are moving into the background and women are moving to the foreground. So it's not that someone like Magdalene or Hathor or the Lady Isis have never been there, but they've been working more in the shadows for the last 2,000 years, but it's their time to step forward. And, you know, we all follow our own interest, really. And I've had a strong focus upon the Celtic. I've got strong connections through my family and through my past lives into Ireland and Scotland and France. And so I've got a great interest in that. And then living in Australia, I have educated myself and become sort of a little bit of knowledge around the Indigenous and the Aboriginal traditions. So Magdalene is simply one of the mothers who are there to help humanity through this enormous crisis of transformation that's going on Earth. And she's, of course, not the only one, but, you know, I think it was, well, in the Christian tradition, she was demonized for centuries. And I don't remember when it was that all of a sudden they decided, no, actually, you know, she's holy and we'll blow the dust off the demonizing and it's okay to talk about Magdalene. Whereas, in fact, the patriarchies lied for decades around this, and not just about Magdalene, but about around many of the Holy Mothers. And I think it's really important for not just women, but also men to recognize that the feminine is divine and we need to honor it and respect it and follow those paths. And we have to start with honoring and respecting the earth, which of course is the ultimate mother. Yeah.
Yeah, well, since you also mentioned, you know, the age of Aquarius, I wanted to ask you, since Pluto, you know, is moving into Aquarius, what do you think this is going to bring forth for us from the point of view of, you know, divine feminine energy and mostly healing, which is what you focus a lot on?
Yes. Well, it's very interesting. The way I would describe it is that humanity are having birth pangs as we grow in consciousness and heart and learn to live in love rather than the opposite of harm. So Pluto moving into Aquarius, the way I look at it, has two vibrations. The highest vibration is to approach life and each other from the heart, rather than what religion, what color, what culture, what racial connection we have and make people right or wrong. So that's the highest vibration, is transformational energy where enough of humanity begin to come from the heart. And the Holy Mothers are, well, it's just the way a mother will be the first nurturing energy, often for a child, carrying the child in the womb, and then they birth the child, and then they feed the child. So the Holy Mothers have that role for humanity. And I'd love to think that most of humanity are ready for that. But unfortunately, and this connects into something that we call esoteric psychology, or the science of the seven rays. So the best use of Pluto in Aquarius is this ray of love and wisdom, where we're wise enough to not start wars, stop killing each other, act from love. But the lower vibration of Pluto in Aquarius is that the mind takes over, and data and the artificial intelligence and the misuse of science takes over. And, you know, we're seeing that everywhere, because we know that Pluto is either transformation or control. So I'd rather have the transformation and the heart and the love, but there is a certain attempt to control society, humanity, by controlling data, controlling privacy, controlling money, controlling almost everything. You know, data's kind of it's like coin, and it's being used and misused on a power level. And, you know, I see that as the shadow of humanity, and we have choices. Are we going to follow the heart, or hand over our power and let people with scrupulous morals or ethics control us through the mind and through our data? And it bothers me greatly, the artificial intelligence, which I see as the lowest vibration of Pluto in Aquarius. And I hope and pray that there are scientists and people involved in technology who are also heart-based, because I love technology and I would love to see it used for the benefit of the planet rather than for the amassing of wealth and power and control for the billionaires. Yeah. And of course, you know, interestingly, I'm an Aquarian and I'm born on the first day of Aquarius, the sun in 0 degrees Aquarius. So I have Pluto transiting across my sun last year and this year. And so I'm kind of vocal about it. And I would love for people to choose the path of the heart and choose transformation and to allow the sacred feminine to step forward and to begin to put the Holy Mothers and the earth in their rightful place. You know, that's what I hope happens, that we have a great awakening, which is happening, but maybe not as fast as we would like. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. So basically, it can go one or two ways. We either wake up, have this spiritual awakening as a collective, maybe, and
Yes.
choose to act from a place of love,
Yes.
or we can kind of give up our control and be kind of over, like technology can impose on us, and we can be led by it rather than taking control back.
That's right. And of course, it's not just Aquarians who are being impacted, but anybody who's got a planet, like I've got the sun in 0 degrees Aquarius, but anyone who's got anything in the early degrees between 0 and 2 degrees of the fixed signs will be having either the conjunction, like myself, or the opposition or the square. So some of us are kind of more in the spotlight, either to lead the way or to change some of our wicked ways, whatever they are, you know, and sort of get with the program, which is really the heart. And it's been enormously, I've noticed in the last year or two, since the lockdowns and the pandemics, that enormous amount of people are actively getting deeply involved in how can I transform myself? How can I be the best version of myself? What tools do I need? And it really doesn't matter. I mean, my tools are healing and meditation, but I meet people who are working in all fields of life, whether it's education or commerce or, you know, working with song and music. There are so many ways we can bring in what I call the new earth. And the Holy Mothers are really the midwives of this spiritual birth, this spiritual transformation. And we have free will on the planet. And it's my generation. I'm from the baby boomers. It's my generation that have cruised along and, you know, not cared too much about the younger generation. And there's disproportionate, certainly in Australia, wealth. A lot of the baby boomers are quite wealthy. A lot of the next generation can't even get to buy a house. Do you know? So there's haves and have-nots everywhere. And certainly I think there's a great amount of national karma being weighed. So in Australia, for instance, our national karma is associated with how we've treated the Aboriginal people. It's genocide. And how we as a nation have still not really been able to face up with that. How we've exploited the earth. It's a very mineral rich country, but it's been degraded, and it's very, very shocking to see the desecration in the name of progress and money through the mining industry. And more recently, how we've locked people who are fleeing you know, difficult scenarios, war or what have you, and refuse to let them come and settle here. So Australia has karma around how we've treated the refugees, how we've treated the Aboriginal people, and how we've treated the earth. And I would imagine that every nation has karma, and we need to do better. And let's hope and pray that they're more of the younger generation with the heart, and more women who come into positions of power, who start making choices and decisions. That we have one female, I think she's the Deputy Prime Minister in Australia, Penny Wong, her name is, and she's been advocating for the Palestinian, you know, genocide, whereas most of the Australian government are in lockstep with the Americans and just looking the other way. And there's one female woman of influence in Australia who's trying to make a difference. If we had 10, well, I wouldn't be ashamed to be an Australian. Do you know what I mean? But unfortunately, we don't have enough. But it is very encouraging. I've done a lot of travel in Europe over the last 15 years or so, and it's really inspiring to see what the female politicians are doing in Iceland, for instance, or, you know, the Scandinavian countries. And so I take heart when I see compassion and women leading. Yeah.
I was also meaning to ask you about your travels, since I know that you've been able to conduct many pilgrimages to sacred sites. Could you
Yes.
tell us how that enriched you and maybe helped you in your practice and as a person too?
Yes. Well, I was quite late traveling. I have 5 children, so I actually didn't travel out of the country until I was in my late 40s, and then I traveled virtually without stop for about 15 years. And you know, I'm a theosophist, a Maitreya theosophist, and that really, in a nutshell, reveres all the world religions. Yeah, and we work for sort of inner transformation through our own shadow, our own Pluto or Saturn or whatever, and working for global peace. But I'd always been involved through prayer and meditation in buildings. And then when I started traveling overseas, it was my friends in Iceland who introduced me to the sacred energy in nature. And, you know, up until that point, I'd loved nature, but I'd never really connected that the earth is actually a temple. And so that then started, it's almost as if it opened a door to mystical experiences. And I found that I had very profound mystical spiritual highs, if you like, while I was in the glaciers of Iceland, or you know, the Western Hebrides in Scotland, or traveling, you know, the fjords in different parts of Scandinavia. And so it's something that I came to kind of later in life. And then, of course, when I came back to Australia, I went, oh my goodness, and I live in this most ancient country. And so I've gone to the deserts and sort of immersed myself in the incredible but very, very different landscapes of Kakadu or the Kimberleys. The Australian Indigenous connection is very profound. And having been brought up and lived in the city until I was probably 30, and most Australians live on the East Coast, and we're a long way from the desert and a long way from the Aboriginal communities. So I sort of made it my business to leave the coast and go to the heartland. And in Australia, it's our most sacred site is Uluru, and it is like the heart chakra of Australia. And through my work as an earth healer, and I was trained in the theosophical tradition through the lady Ananda Tarashan, I've learned that we can all be vehicles for healing of ourselves and the earth when we put our feet on land. And there are some places in Australia where the massacres have happened. So there are some places that are very desecrated and other places that are very sacred. And so it's a never-ending journey for me. You know, I've been introduced and met the national devas in Denmark and Iceland and New Zealand. And because of my clairvoyance, I have this sort of capacity to see and communicate and speak and connect in. And I just love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah. So I sort of live in another world, really, when I visit nature. Yeah.
Well, yes. Who doesn't love to get lost in nature after all?
That's right. Yeah.
Since you mentioned a couple times meditation, I wanted to ask, what role does meditation play in your work? Because I was also able to see that you do a lot of guided meditations, you know, to connect with the
Yes.
feminine.
Yes, well, I started working as an astrologer in my early 20s. And in my late 20s, I sort of realized that I had some relationship issues, and I had this epiphany, and I realized that just understanding my chart and understanding psychologically wasn't changing things. And I sort of realized that I needed another tool to change deep-seated patterns within myself. And I was looking for another tool, and I stumbled upon, fortunately, meditation. And it helped me to it's a bit like the radio, you know, you've got the AM and the FM and you can choose what channel you want to be on. Well, I wanted to be on my higher self, my soul's channel, not on my personality, my ego's channel. And so meditation helped me to differentiate the difference. Where does this thought come from? Is this a thought that's coming from my personality, from my ego? Is it coming from my soul? How can I get a better soul connection? It's a bit like, how can you get a good connection with your mobile phone? Well, you've got to stand at the highest point and sometimes hold the device up high to get a really good signal. So meditation for me is about getting the best possible signal so that I can stay on track with the purpose of my life and make the best use of my whatever talents and skills or dharma that I have. And I was very fortunate that in my 30s, I encountered my spiritual teacher and moved into the path of Maitreya Theosophy, and that you can follow that maitreyatheosophy.org, and you'll see the teachings and lots of information on meditation there. And I've just continued to use meditation as a practice to sort of keep myself as clear a channel as I can possibly be throughout my life. And it stood me in great stead. Yeah.
We talked about, I mean, you mentioned that during isolation, some people, during the pandemic, some people were able to kind of tap into their spiritual side a little bit more. Do you think that the isolation we experienced during the COVID pandemic helped, mostly helped people connect with themselves more, or was it mostly negative from a spiritual point of view?
Well, I guess that I'd say it was a bit of a taste of, well, everybody has very strong views about the pandemic. People have very strong views about what medical choices they made. My view is that everybody has the right to make their own choice about it. But unfortunately, I did notice that it was very divisive in society, and people tended to say, well, I'm right and you're wrong. So I think it heightened separation, and it gave us the opportunity to realize that what we have in common is our humanity. And we may differ according to all kinds of political or medical views, but ultimately we have to find a way of having tolerance and respect to bridge the gap. And I think that the lesson, because I think it was an opportunity for humanity to choose greater love and choose tolerance and choose inclusion, rather than choose separation and fear and anxiety. And I have noticed literally in the last, because I've always worked as an educator and a teacher and run groups. And like everybody else, a lot of my work shifted online. I'd always worked internationally online before, but it was a small part of my work. But then it became more like 75% of my work when everyone was locked down. And I've noticed that since then, people are hungry for personal connection. Absolutely hungry, because we're human and we need personal connection. So I think it's helped us to realize that we have more in common that unites us than we have that separates us. And really, I mean, you know, I have fairly strong views about the role of the media and how it can be used for good or for ill, and whether or not using fear as a big stick to get people to do what you want is actually democracy. And I guess maybe I'm old-fashioned and you know, old. And I remember that it wasn't like this in Australia in the 70s. Society was much freer, and the life in Australia has been far more controlled and tracked and traced. And I find it very offensive. And maybe that's the Aquarian in me, but I get quite rebellious about it. You know, for instance, I was making a slideshow a couple of months ago on a word program. I discovered that I'd ticked the box that said I want the new download, and I agreed to the new terms and conditions of PowerPoint. And I didn't know, but I soon discovered that that included that any teaching materials that I make online are copied by artificial intelligence and sent back off to Microsoft. Wow. Yeah, that's and you know, that's just one tiny example, and I find that deeply insulting. and I'm not quite sure how to step away from it. But I find it very dangerous because I see that it's a slippery slope to democracy. But more and more people are realizing that actually, you know, I have certain inalienable human rights. And I think that that's the best and the positive that's come out of the lockdowns, is that more people are awake to being manipulated or controlled or dictated to by the media. Or in Australia, it's the mining magnates who donate a lot of money to the governments. And so the government does what the mining industry wants. It's a bit like in America, it's the gun lobby that has control over the politics. In Australia, it's the mining lobby. But the younger generation are waking up to it and, you know, saying thanks, but no thanks. You know, so I'm very hopeful. And it's happening across the board. I mean, I object to the push towards digital currency and the removal of cash, because I think that's a fundamental principle of democracy, is the right to have cash and spend it how I want it. Yeah, and as you can probably hear, I have a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the first house, so I'm very sort of driven with social causes and kind of progressive in my thinking, which I have very little earth in my chart, so I don't tend to take a more middle of the road. I would much rather that we forge forward from the heart, and I would much rather that the women take the lead and the younger generation take the lead, and that we respect the earth.
Yes, well, I can completely agree with you on that, and I hope that my generation can bring about the change we've been waiting for a while.
Well, we have been. That's right. I mean, back in the 60s, you know, I'm born in the 50s, and we all thought that the new age was just around the corner. And we had the prophet of Bob Dylan and this, that, and the other. And then somehow or other along the way in the late 80s, the baby boomers got complacent and chose complacency or money or power instead of growth and change. And of course, you know, I suppose working as an astrologer, you're always left of center. But you know, some part of my generation dropped the ball, really. Yeah, which is very sad, but it's lovely to see, because we're on the way out now. The boomers are on the way out, and we'll be judged according to our karma, and the next generation that are coming through have different crises, not the least of which is this loss of democracy and the desecration of the earth and space, I would have to say. That's the other thing that I get a bit het up about, is the space race that's being run by the billionaires in order to control space, which then controls technology for the planet, which then controls data. You know what I mean? So space, I think, is for the angels and for wonder and for the mystical and the magical. It's not to sort of, you know, build empires. Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving us, you know, your point of view on this. It
Yes.
is refreshing, you know, to see somebody agree with us with our problems. I have another question, because we are trying to get a sense of how far the work of Italian astrologers has gotten. Have you had the chance to come into contact with, you know, with some work done by Italians?
I wish I had, but no. In my travels, I mainly went to Scandinavia, Scotland, Iceland, France, and into Egypt. And I did come close to the Italian border. Where was I? Down at Nice. That's as close as I've come to the Italian border, but I've actually never been to Italy. And I'm very sorry to say I've never had any connection with the Italian astrologers, but I would love to hear from you where your field's going and what's happening that's of interest there.
Well, I'm not the expert here, but I'm sure that Amata is gonna, you know, elaborate on that a lot. But thank you, because this is a real curiosity of ours. Since in Italy there is a lot of material coming, from overseas, Australia, America,
Yes.
France, but we have seen that it's not the same for our material and our astrologic tradition, which goes back many, many centuries. So it's a
Yeah.
bit sad to us, but it's something we can work on, hopefully,
Well,
globalize.
yeah, I mean, it's such a big field. I started out as a traditional astrologer, then I became interested in psychological, and then I worked for a while with karmic astrology and spiritual and medical. But, my classification now is I work with esoteric astrology. And there is only a small percentage of esoteric astrologers on the planet, never mind in any one country. And esoteric astrology incorporates the field of the personal self and the soul. Yeah. And that's kind of the heaven and the earth of it. So I think whatever specialization or interest that you have, if we all push forward in the area that really we have a passion for, then the field will expand. Yeah. And I think women do have to take the lead, and it must be of the heart. And the moment one starts to meditate, you know, prior to my meditation practice, I used to have intuition about things astrologically that I'd never seen written in books. And then once I'd become involved in meditation and then entered into esoteric astrology, I discovered that there was a completely different rulership system. So instead of Venus ruling Taurus, Vulcan rules Taurus. Instead of Mercury ruling Gemini, Venus rules Gemini. So that's enough to do any astrologer's head in, when you think, well, how do you get your head around that? But what I did discover was that some of the things that I had thought were my own intuition were actually the foundations of esoteric astrology. So I believe that we do eventually find the field that is calling us if we keep looking according to our talents and our skills,
Well, yes. Thank you for that message. It was really, really nice. And I
Yeah,
think this is a wonderful way to conclude our interview. Thank
lovely.
you very much again for joining us. We were very, very happy to have you.
Yes, and I will go on. I don't know whether you interview other people and whether, because I don't speak any other language apart from astrology and English,
Well,
but
our
whether there are
questions,
other interviews in English.
yes, there are actually so far, all of them have been in English. So,
Ah,
uh,
well, there you go. I've been
yes,
busy in the last month, but I will check out. So I will find them on the website or the Facebook page or both.
yes, also on YouTube.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, wonderful. I look forward to going through your archive. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Very nice to meet you. Yep. And we'll be in touch, I'm sure. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.